Welcome to the InfoMullet YouTube channel. If you enjoy this content, please like or share. And if you'd like to support the InfoMullet by becoming a Mulleteer, visit us on Patreon. We appreciate your support. So welcome to Saturday Night Special. It's March 14th. Feels like a week since I did this, but it's only been a couple days. It's obviously been a lot of information coming about COVID. Released a new update today, and I'm going to put it in the links. I've been tracking WHO data, World Health Organization data, and so what we're going to do tonight is I'm going to do a brief part. This will be similar to Wednesday, but if you've already seen Wednesday, there will be new information. I'm going to go over an update of where we're at globally and by region. I'll do that. I'll talk a little bit about the different responses countries are having, but then like last time, we're going to open it up to Q&A. So if you have questions, put them in the comments. I will try. Hey, Mike Lyons, good to see you. I'll try and make sure that we get to the questions. If I miss it, there's a lot of comments streaming. I got a lot of pages open in the background. If I've missed it, please let me know. If you have a chance and you haven't, you want to become a Mulleteer subscriber, visit us on Patreon, www, or I guess I can type it in here. That's how you become a Mulleteer. We're going to have a social after this. We're going to try our first social on the Discord server afterwards. So if you're a Mulleteer and you have your Discord set up after this video ends, we're going to kind of go into that and have a sort of more casual social interaction with the Mulleteers. And so getting started, where we're at in the world, I put the information out there. When we left on Wednesday, Italy was obviously in the news for having an outbreak, and the rest of Europe was looking bad. And what I think has become the big headline news, when I charted this data this morning, I incorporated the death rate in Italy. And the death rate is a dynamic rate. It goes up and down, and it's simply the number who have passed divided into the confirmed cases. And what was alarming to me and caused me to make a post on this earlier than I was thinking is that the death rate in Italy has jumped over 7%. That's infected cases, 7% of confirmed cases, not 7% of the total population, but 7% of confirmed cases. And that's a very high number. We were seeing earlier out of China 4%, 3%. There were some, some early indications out of South Korea and Japan. It may be lower. But I think if we talk about this movement called, it's hashtag flatten the curve, it's the depiction of the sharp curve, which you've seen in several articles from me by this point, and you've probably seen it elsewhere. It's the depiction of the curve, what happens when this virus causes an overload in a local area in a short amount of time, and what happens to the healthcare infrastructure. So I'm going to put in, there's a link on that article at the very top. You're going to see the picture of that sharp curve versus the flatter curve. And the thing about flatten the curve is now, this was sort of hypothetical. Everyone's talking about it. They're mentioning it as a risk. Italy has now shown the consequence of what happens when you don't flatten the curve. So in Italy, they got absolutely crushed with cases. They are now close to 15,000 cases, and it's doubling every 3 days. So people often underestimate. They see a growth rate of 20%, 30%. What we're seeing now with Italy is that doubling is every few days. It's going to be 30,000 cases early next week, and it might be 60,000 cases by the end of next week. And if 7% of those people are dying, that's a really significant development. And what's happening is that the cases in Italy are not across, we think of these numbers, Italy, 15,000, we think of the entire peninsula and the boot, and we distribute those cases across the entire region. But the reality is this virus is incredibly clustered in the areas where the contagion starts. So in this case, it began in northern Italy, near Milan and Lombardy. And those areas, even some of the outlying areas, is actually more in suburban areas than cities. And those suburban areas didn't have the hospital resources to deal with the surge. People are saying things like, well, yeah, it's as bad as the flu season. The healthcare infrastructure may be designed for the flu season, but what we're doing is taking a flu season and putting another flu season on top of it. And what this flatten the curve effect happens is when you have critical and maybe severe cases, and again, the WHO definition, mild, everything from you don't notice to it feels like a normal flu hit by a truck, but you don't need to go to the hospital. A severe case is a visit to the hospital. A critical case is hospitalization. These critical cases often involve respiratory needs, advanced ICU services and beds, and when these hospitals get overwhelmed, they aren't able to support that, and the fatality rate spikes. So what we've seen in Italy is the actual manifestation of this failure to flatten the curve. And this is really concerning because if you go to that chart I linked and scroll down to Europe, Europe is in really bad shape right now. Europe, many countries in Europe did not take advantage of the advance warning and put in place the kind of social distancing. I mean, you saw if you were in the United States or at all familiar with what's going on in the last week, everything shut down. Literally in the last, literally Thursday and Friday, you had sporting events canceled, you had celebrity events canceled, you had South by Southwest canceled, you have festivals canceled. All sorts of private groups, if they're smart, are canceling their private events, and basically all non-essential gatherings were beginning to be canceled because of this concern about the risk of the curve. However, in Europe, you have, for example, the Netherlands. They initially reacted that said, well, if you don't feel sick, you're probably not infectious. Go ahead and go to work. Go ahead and go around. In Germany, they were not actually, even though Germany has 2 or 3 times the case of the U.S., they were not canceling the events voluntarily until last night. So Germany, Friday night, you think about the U.S. is behind Italy and Europe by a week or two in terms of the total case, at least the confirmed case count. Europe has, in some ways, dropped the balls. And it's not, a lot of people are like, well, they're going to have really good healthcare systems and they've got an advanced health infrastructure. That's not really the situation here, because if you look at it, the Nordic countries are hurting from this. Benelux is hurting from this. Germany's hurting from this. And the risk is not, yeah, you may have great healthcare facilities, but are they designed for the surge capacity that comes up when this sharp curve hits? And we're going to talk a little bit about containment strategies after we get through the regional and global update. But outside of Europe, we're now starting to see, last week at this time, the stories were China, Italy, Iran, South Korea. Those were the ones that were facing outbreak. Now, most of Europe is facing an outbreak scenario. And again, an outbreak, I want to be clear, it doesn't mean the whole population is going to get it, but you're going to have that surge and that risk of the curve not being flattened. But in addition to Europe, one of the big questions is, why wasn't there any cases in Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh? And in Bangladesh, there were only 3 cases, and there was a lot of concern that cases are being missed or underreported. This is, within those 3 countries, 1.8 billion people live very close together, often without access to great health care. And what we found, I was working with some activists and some folks local on the ground this week, is in Bangladesh, a lot of cases were being classified as atypical pneumonia. And this is really bad because it means that in Bangladesh, there's an unknown number of COVID cases that weren't properly classified, and the healthcare workers treating them probably weren't using the proper protective equipment, which means that you may have a surge in cases in Bangladesh concentrated in the healthcare workers, and this may really cause a challenge in responding to it. Likewise, last week, South America, only a handful of cases. Now Brazil's over 100. And in all of these cases, all this data I'm using is confirmed cases. I use the World Health Organization daily situation reports. I download their database, I do some Excel foo and get it sorted out so I can chart it. These confirmed cases may be underreporting total cases by a factor of 2 to 7, depending on how good the testing is in that area. Because a lot of the cases are so mild that you're asymptomatic or not showing much, but you're still spreading it. And so the regional updates is the Gulf Community Cooperation Council, so we're talking Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, they're spiking. It looks like they're going to have an outbreak now if it's not already underway. You're still not seeing much in Southeast Asia, but you're starting to see now these countries, and the real key for each country is not their underlying healthcare structure. It's, again, how fast do they get out with information? How fast do they get out with education? And how fast do they begin creating the social distancing to flatten that curve? So we're going to pivot into, we did a little bit of this on Wednesday, so I apologize, review for those, but this will hopefully be new to enough. There's kind of 3 responses that have come out now. The Chinese response we know was early suppression of information, denial it was happening. That obviously didn't contain it. It just allowed it to spread. But then they came in with a very heavy-handed authoritarian quarantine. You know, this is the Hollywood quarantine. You have military, they put up barriers in the towns, they physically quarantine, and that's a very resource-intensive effort focused on Wuhan City and Hubei province where this originally broke out. And they were getting credit for being, heavy-handed, but it's a debate of whether it was their own suppression of information at the front end that created the outbreak, which they then needed to contain. And there's a really good case study in South Korea by contrast. South Korea had an outbreak. They lost control of it. It got up to 5,000 or 6,000 people. So you're talking now levels that a week ago were the second highest in the world. Now Italy has surpassed it. But South Korea's contagion response, by contrast with China, was overwhelming information. They had mobile apps that tracked where confirmed cases were, and this Singapore did the same thing. So you got South Korea and Singapore took this opposite approach. Overwhelming response, heavy testing. If you think about tests are like spotlights. If you deploy your tests all over the place, you have spotlights and you can see where these cases are. You know not only where it is, but where it might be going. Because this takes 6 to 11 days to fully form once you get infected, you need to know where these people are going. So heavy testing, heavy information, lots of mobile app tracking. And so in this case, the quarantine wasn't the government saying we're going to block off this city or use the military and close this down. It's identifying where the infected confirmed cases so people can sort themselves around. And this is very effective in a society that has a lot of access to mobile apps and is sort of on their phones all the time. If I'm walking around and I see that there's a building over there where someone lives that's got a confirmed case, I might move myself to a different street. I might avoid that part of town, but I'm not having to shut down the whole town. I'm not, as a state, wasting resources trying to shut down entire neighborhoods. Because let's face it, when you put up physical barriers and try and enforce it, the first thing someone's going to do is going to go over that wall, under that wall, around the wall, bribe the guards, sneak out. You're not going to really have containment. You may have the false security of containment, but you're basically using state resources to maintain containment. When you provide mobile application information, people are using their own things and their own, hey, I don't want to get sick, and managing themselves around. It allows the city. South Korea never had to go into heavy quarantines. South Korea also used drive-through testing. They would test, they had a facility and they would check temperature, and if your temperature spiked a little more, they would give you a certain test. But the key thing is they're able to process lots of people in these tests rapidly, which gave them the information that fed the mobile app. So if you think about volume, South Korea was testing about 10,000 a day. The U.S. right now is still only testing about 1,000 a day. So South Korea is testing a lot, and that gives them the necessary information. The problem with the South Korea response, and why it might not be as easy for Europe and the United States to follow, is that the privacy laws are different. You're talking about, here's where the confirmed patients are, here's all their details. I mean, it's not like what their hair color is and their height or anything like that, I don't think, but it's very specific about who is infected and why. Well, that's private data, and there's a lot of laws in the US and Europe that may make sharing that private data tricky. And in some places, there's a risk of, if you share this data, you may be creating backlash or retaliation or harassment or against the individuals who are confirmed cases. In some areas you might have risks of the neighborhood gets scared and wants to run them out of the area because they think they're dangerous. This happens all the time in plagues. Even though we're a modern society, we're not too far from people getting panicked. And this is one reason I often am always fighting against the urge to panic, is that people, when they're panicked, do irrational things. And if you're panicked and you think your family's at risk and you see someone down the street has it, you may go try and harass them to get rid of them. But by doing this major information sharing, South Korea and Singapore were able to provide services, so they didn't isolate. The people who were sick got the services they need, and they've been able to contain it. The third approach is actually what we're seeing now the U.S. start to do. And the U.S. has a very different approach, which involves for lack of a better word, bungling the test development. So as I mentioned on the Wednesday, the reason tests have been very difficult in the U.S. is there was a choice by the CDC very early on. There were tests that the WHO had developed that could have been deployed, but the CDC made a choice, and we can argue in hindsight, good or bad choice. It was a choice that they were going to combine the COVID test with all the other flu tests. So you would have one test that would tell you all the flus you had and COVID, do it at once. And there's reasons for doing that. The problem was it introduced complexity into the test itself. So it took a while to develop. They couldn't just take off the shelf what the WHO had. And when they got it developed, they found out there was a quality control bug or something in the production, and they had to recall all the tests because they were no longer effective. And this cost us several weeks of critical, not just testing, but development and stockpiling of tests. And that's only been fixed in the last week and a half, weeks. So you're starting to see more tests become available. The consequence of this shortage of tests, though, was that the CDC guidelines, they knew they had a limited number of tests that worked. And so they started issuing conflicting guidance of who gets tested when. And you would hear situations where they would only test if you have probable cause. And doctors are getting this guidance, and they're human too. So doctors are receiving a guidance one day. Maybe the guidance was updated the next day, but the doctors didn't catch it. So now doctors are giving conflicting guidance to their patients. And I think this testing problem is largely fixing itself now. We're getting on the flip side of it. The information is consistent. Tests are becoming more available. There's efforts by like Google and folks like that to create apps to find where the tests are in your area. The problem is we've lost several weeks that we needed to test this. So we may actually be as bad as Europe. We just don't know because we're not testing as well. But the good thing that has happened in the US that hasn't happened in Europe as much is what you saw Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. I mean, I hate to say it because I'm proud to be an American, but Americans love to freak out. And we freaked out, right? We we freaked out hard. The stock market's dropping. That's our safety blanket, whether we're invested or not. We always look at that, and if it's high, we feel good. If it's going down the toilet, we feel bad. We were having a few press conferences that could have been more artfully performed by a stump, maybe. I don't know. They weren't effective at instilling confidence. And then we had Tom Hanks and Charles Barkley both get sick. So there's our grandfathers of certain generations now have this. And all of a sudden, everything begins shutting down. You begin seeing Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Businesses are shifting their workforces remote. I mean, lift and shift in massive ways. You're seeing festivals, South by Southwest canceled. Sporting events canceled. You had the governor of Washington issue some very strong language banning any gathering over 250. So you think about 250 people, that's not a lot. That's a church service, that's a school recital, that's a musical. All those events are banned in Washington. And I think privately, the private sector and the public sector sort of in their own way began reacting. And all across the board, you're seeing the canceling of non-essential things. And that's a really good step because what it does is it creates this like, it's like a fire line, right? Your fire is advancing toward you. If you get all of the debris out of the way and you make a clear space, that's what the social distancing does. It's trying to remove the context the virus can use for spread. Whether it's going to work or not, we won't know. One of the real challenges with this from a system structure standpoint that I wanted to go over is if we think about the system is the world as it actually is. The system knows where every person who has the virus is, but we don't know what the system knows. The system state right now knows exactly how many people are sick in the United States, but we don't know it because we only perceive the system through an information delay. And that information delay is how long it takes for that person to go get a test, how long it takes to get tests to get processed, how long it takes that result to go to the World Health Organization, and how long the World Health Organization takes to update. So you've got a delay. That's only one delay, though. There's also a perception delay in that people are reacting to information as it comes out lagged. So we're actually now seeing the results of the virus infections based off the perceptions of a week or 2 weeks ago. And in Italy, this is noteworthy because if you look at the Italy example, and I'll put this up on the screen again. If you scroll down to Europe, you will see a chart that in the Southern Europe, you will see, here we go. You'll see a chart that shows change over time, and it looks really noisy, but if you look at that blue line is Italy. So total cases is the number of confirmed cases we have. Change over time is the number of increase in daily new cases. You see that blue line is Italy. It's kind of going down. I have some charts to add to this when I get off the Ask Me Anything that isolate Italy, but Italy's actually decreasing the rate of contagion. So it's gone from being 40, 50% to now only being 20%. And that's good. You can think of it like a car that's going a certain speed. You hit the accelerator, you're going to accelerate. If you ease off the gas, but your foot's still on the pedal, you're still accelerating, but not as much. Once the foot comes off the pedal, the car begins decelerating, and eventually the car will slow and stop. So the first thing you have to see when you're even thinking about containing this is the acceleration in growth declining? And we're seeing that in Italy. I mentioned it on Wednesday. I've now seen several days. And I think what that is a reaction to is the perception last week. So what we're seeing in the decline of cases now is the perception from last week where all of a sudden Italians said, this is really super serious. And they began reacting. That's good. That's what you want to see. The problem is Italy has 15,000 cases, about maybe 17,000. And a back of the napkin number is you take the rate of growth as a percent, divide it into 72, and that's how many days it takes to double. Okay? So let's use Italy as an example and then talk about the US. If Italy has a 20% growth rate, even as it declines, 20% into 72 roughly, 3. Every 3 days it will double. It's 15,000 now. 3 days from now it'll be 30,000. 3 days from then it'll be 60,000. 3 days from then it might be 120,000. It will not stay at 20%. It'll probably decline more, so you'll begin to see that S-shaped curve. But once you have a large number, the doubling really adds up. And I think there's this perception lag that people like, they hear 600 and they think, well, okay, that's not much. They hear 1,000, that's not a lot. It's not until they hear 9 or 10,000 that they really begin to freak out. And by that point, the doubling effect is only 3 days away. So you go through, it may feel like you've got a lot of time from 100 to 600 to 1,000, but from 1,000 to 10,000 is not long at all. That doubling effect can cause it to increase very rapidly. And that's the risk of the United States. So if we scroll down to North America, which is at the top of those charts, you see that the growth rate in America, the United States, excuse me, is actually still hovering around, if we average it out, about 30%. So 30% means that it doubles every 2 days. So we're looking at, I don't remember what the exact number was. Let's see, I lost my screen here. The exact number in the US is, yeah, we're cresting about 2,000, something like that. We're going to, if we double every 2 days, this is going to, by probably Wednesday, Thursday, Friday of next week, there are going to be a lot of people who didn't make decisions this last week that are going to regret it. And I'm not saying like they're going to die. I mean, they're going to be feeling, why didn't I make the change when I had the choice? And that's that time lag that really causes a challenge in viral, is that we're often reacting to information that's old, and the doubling effect is so fast that you lose those few weeks because of tests. People say, well, I'll cancel work. Like, I'll give you a prediction. If your work can be done remotely and isn't as of Friday, my guess is by Wednesday, a big chunk of your work will be, because someone's making calls right now that are saying you need to get those people out of the area, start working. And again, it's different for schools. Schools I consider an essential service. You know, there's a lot of things that are physically delivered at school beyond teaching that have to maintain. I'm not talking essential. I'm talking non-essential. You do your work on your laptop like me. Your laptop's at work, your laptop's at home. Those types of activities and jobs, you're going to see a big push to remove remote if they haven't already. And that's what's going to come up in the US here probably over the next week. And I think we're going to see it accelerate. The final bit, and then I'll get into the Q&A, is the time. How long does this take? How long do we experience this? Well, those charts I put together are all, the bottom line is not a calendar time. It's a days since first confirmed patient. And you can see that the days, they're all that way. Even if they start at different times, they're all aligned, so you can see a life cycle, what China looked like, what Italy looks like, and you can see at the same time since the first patient, how are they performing. So you can see that Italy's actually just a little bit shifted from China, from their experience, and the US is more shifted. So the question is, from the point of where the outbreak occurs, and the way you tell outbreak of that, this is fairly notional, but it's sort of simple stuff. There's a blue band on those risk thresholds, and it's the steepness of the line of the growth as it crosses that band. A very steep line means you have a high doubling factor. You've got an exponential growth. And if you are crossing that risk threshold while doubling, you're going to be well above it by the time you realize the risk is there. If you enter that blue band on a very narrow slope, you can see this in Japan. If you look at the Japan example, it actually took a while to incrementally go up. That's what flattening the curve looks like. It's not entering the risk threshold at a vertical, it's coming in at a very shallow. When you look at Italy, they failed to flatten the curve. They entered it in a near vertical, not vertical, but like a double black diamond ski slope. It was a pretty steep, and you see now the consequences. They are up to 17,000. The problem is many other countries in Europe, when you look at those charts, are already crossing or crossed that threshold at the same velocity, which means that they're probably going to have similar kinds of challenges as Italy. How long does it last? In China, from the point they crossed that threshold to where it was stabilized, probably 20 to 30 days. And that's a lot of doubling time to deal with. Now, it does eventually contain itself both by the structure of the virus, it burns itself out, and by people becoming aware and socially isolating. It does eventually stabilize and you get the S-curve. But it takes 20 to 30 days to do that. And so we're looking at a period of time right now for probably at least a month where we're going to be under these conditions of everyone socially isolate, don't do any non-essential events, and probably even after the data, right, the system's going to stabilize, but it's going to take us humans another 3 to 4 weeks to feel comfortable that it has stabilized and it is over. So when it comes to flattening the curve, the two things you can do is get ahead of it and contain it. And the last thing, which a lot of countries may have to do, is you're going to have this sharp curve. There's a geographic aspect. Those patients that need the support are clustered in local areas, and it's not distributed evenly across the country. So in Italy, in the United States, in Germany, in Iran, I think policymakers need to begin discussing how do we bring in resources to areas that can't cope so that we're flooding an area that has that sharp curve with resources that can support those patients? Or riskier, how do we transport the patients out of that area and distribute that sharp curve across the rest of the system, which isn't as heavily burdened? I mean, it's not with COVID, it's not yet systemic across the board. It's always locally clustered. Northern Italy for Italy, Seattle, Washington for Washington or United States, although New York's coming. These clusters can be managed. You can manage the curve even if you don't flatten it at a time perspective by reducing the infection rate. You can still flatten it from a geographic perspective. The problem is it's risky to patients to move them, obviously. These are people in critical condition, ICU. It's risky to folks coming in or moving out that you now have new vectors of contagion. And also, if people are panicked, and again, this is why I'm a big fan of not creating public panic, there's going to be a backlash of the concept of, well, we'll bring COVID patients from area A into our hometown. Historically, this is always a flashpoint for very strong reactions in people when there's a really scary disease or plague and you start talking about moving people from area A into your hometown. That is a point of potential instability, and governments need to get ahead of it, start educating the public, indicating what their protocols are and how they're going to do it and how they're going to do it safely, so that when they do need to do that, they need to shift patients in different areas, there's not that kind of protest. So I'm going to pause here and start going through questions. All right, so lots of questions, good questions. Let me scroll back up. Yeah, Stephen, first thing, just got back from Kroger Pharmacy. Shelves are decimated. That's a thing that feeds concern. When you go to the store and the shelves are empty, that's going to feed that panic cycle, and it's going to make you do something irrational. And so, yeah, that's question. Good evening, Barbara. Let's see. Lots of people joined. Stefan, Bill, Heather, Tim. Welcome, everyone. Tandy. Can you talk about the Egyptian cruise ship cases? No, I can't, because I don't know it specifically. I do know cruise ship cases are a challenge because it's a floating incubator. This was a question by Sabrina, so if there's a link or something, I can maybe look at it and answer it on the Facebook post. But there's actually a separate category of cruise ships that are tracked by the World Health Organization because they ended up being, you've got a contained area with hundreds of people. They often are traveling back and forth, and the outbreak would occur while the cruise ship was in progress. There might only be a few cases, but then the country wouldn't allow the cruise ship to dock, and that resulted in people now being more exposed, and the cruise ship kind of came a feedback loop. More people on the cruise ship got shipped. The authorities didn't want to dock. It happened off the coast of California, happened off the coast of Japan. There's apparently an issue in Egypt. I'll try and look in that. Let's see. Yeah, so we have a report. I'm not going to name names, but universities that require staff to come in, even if work can be done remotely, they're going to be the universities that regret making that decision come Thursday or Friday. I'm not surprised if over the weekend, if you're a large employer, your senior leaders are not getting contacted by government officials saying, you know, I know you've got reasons for not doing it. They may not matter anymore. You need to begin working remotely if you can, because not everyone can work remotely. The whole point of this is not to take society and upend it. It's to say what's non-essential for working on site that we can reduce the contact risk and create that fire break. Mike Lyons School shut down Thursday, Friday. Whole county shut down, non-essential for 2 weeks. This is something you're going to see in schools. Beth as well mentioned school district closed for 14 days. I'm going to go on a limb here. People are reacting to the information of last week, and they're closing schools for 2 weeks, 3 weeks. They're probably not going to want to open them in this 20 to 30 day period. And I would anticipate that by the time it begins to look to see whether it wants to be open, we're still in that uncertainty period. And at least for a lot of schools that have a sort of traditional, summer break, there's going to be a real question of whether schools open again before the fall. And that's going to be case by case. I'm not making a strong prediction. If there's no outbreaks in an area, they may decide to reopen. But my guess is it's going to be 20 to 30 days that we're seeing more and more of this contagion across the country. And those schools that are closed will stay closed. And then they're going to look at, do we want to reopen for only 2 weeks? Do we plan in the summer? Is it worth the risk? So I would expect school closures to last a lot longer. And these sort of temporary measures of how do you do remote or how do you serve services, meals, things like that, to be a focus of. Yeah, I see Tony there feeding the panic signal. Tony's got a good point. Tony knows what he's talking about. We just disagree on Washington State. Okay, so If I'm missing questions, please add them because I saw a lot of chatter, but there weren't a whole lot of questions in there besides the Egyptian cruise case. Let me go back and forth. Um, I think there will probably be some waves of reckoning, so to speak, where there might be times where the stores get restocked up, but everyone doesn't want to go out, so there's a good time to get them. But I think we're really going to be in for 20 to 30 days at this point. I have a consulting business that has been absolutely decimated by this. By the way, Patreon, donate. I don't think my consulting business is going to do much in the next 2 months. That's sort of what I'm mentally preparing for, is that this is going to take all the attention and everything's going to be focused on this because of this 20, 30 day issue. If people are posting statuses, I hope that's for other folks. I don't really have the ability to go click on it and link and read it while I'm doing this live. So are there questions that people have about responses globally, certain regions that are going on, or any of the things I've talked about? I'll give a couple seconds for people to ask those questions so I can answer them. Okay, so Elizabeth, good to see you, Elizabeth. She's reporting from Paris. Insisted teaching class went online, wasn't well received. Week later, France essentially locked down. So this is Elizabeth. Thank you for sharing that. Elizabeth is sharing what I'm trying to, or what it looks like the U.S. may avoid by doing this voluntary shutdown last week. In France, in the Netherlands, in some of the Nordic countries, in Germany, you have this kind of culture of, well, we'll get through this. And that culture really harmed their initial responses, and they had a lot of pushback for what would have been made an enormous difference a week and a half ago. They missed it, and because of that doubling period, there's not a lot of time to miss. If you miss something and it doubles over 60 days, well, you got 60 days until you got twice the problem you had last week. But if you think about it, well, we'll check next week. If this is doubling every 2 or 3 days, by next week it may be 2 to 3 times worse than it was this week. And even if you now put in place your things, it's going to double another time in another 3 days, and all of a sudden you're off to the races. And this is the real challenge about this sort of differences in response between what I'm seeing as the European response. It's hard to tell what correlates. A lot of people are saying, why are some countries better than others? It looks like those countries that dealt with SARS or the Middle East Respiratory Syndrome, I think it's MERS, seem to have better preparation, at least in the Asian area. Singapore, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, they've dealt with this kind of respiratory illness, and they had this experience where SARS and MERS didn't really get into the U.S. all that much, I don't think, not as much as the H1N1. Someone can correct me, because if I'm wrong, someone will. But the countries that had that experience seem to be better prepared to say, this is serious, we'll take it seriously, and we'll get ahead of it, to do that distancing, and they've had a better job containing it. So it's not like it's impossible to contain. You just have to get out in front. Mike is reporting his wife is a nurse, and that they're having to do services from home, training staff beginning next week. Brian asks, are epidemiologists saying we'll be dealing with this for the next 3 to 6 months? So this is a good question of, like I said, the initial outbreak that we're seeing in China took 20 to 30 days to stabilize. So that's a month right there. What is not known is whether, a couple things. Will this continue reinfecting in the summer months, or as it gets hotter, will the virus sort of die off and sort of have an environmental benefit? Or will we have continual outbreaks, and China's next one is just a few months away? So we don't know yet. I've seen some reports that, and the Lancet medical article had an article, Angela Merkel, I've seen numbers as high as 60 to 80% of the population. I want to be cautious. When I dig in to those academic papers, and yes, I will read more than the abstract. People are often quoting the abstract or sort of the scary number. You go in and read the paper. The 60% is a very worst case scenario, assuming nothing happens, like intervention. So they, even in the Lancet article, where they cite the 60% infection rate over a period of months, they're saying that's assuming that people aren't doing the very things we're seeing them now do. It turns out having a mass contagion and risk of people dying tends to motivate people to do stuff. The question is it fast enough? Do we know where King County is? How do we model this? Or, yeah, King County is, I hate that this is Christine Astros, by the way. Christine, fellow Mercer Island alumni. I hope there's a few out there. Go Slugs. The challenge in Washington, and I mean, my parents live there. They're in a facility now that has its first confirmed case in an active living home. And the challenge in King County, Snohomish County, is they're the version of Italy, right? This is a place where the coronavirus got in. It spread rapidly, and although there's a great effort by Governor Inslee and what's being happening now, the question is, will you have that sharp curve where cases, I think there was something like 600 cases in the Seattle area, greater Seattle area, I might be mistaken. As those cases spike, some of them are going to need hospitalization. Now, the general data from the WHO is that you take 100 cases, 80 of those are going to be mild. They don't require any hospital visits. They'll live through it. The danger there is they may still go around and spread it. So social distancing helps and isolation helps those people from spreading it, but they're not going to need hospital services. About 15% requires what have severe cases, and this requires a hospital visit and complications. And 5% are critical cases. Critical cases is ICU requiring respiratory services. And the trick is this varies by age demographic. If you are an older age demographic, you're 80, you're 70, those cases become much more serious. So the problem in King County is this started in an elderly home, the Life Care Center in Everett. And that Life Care Center wasn't just an elderly residential home, it was also a nursing and convalescence home for a bunch of other elderly facilities in the area, including my parents. So I'm speaking of this from like some personal knowledge. Emerald Heights used that facility for recovery of surgery, post-op support, and you had residents, elderly residents going in from all of these surrounding areas into Life Care's facility right up until the point it was shut down. And that's why you're seeing the breakout on the east side. And for those not in the area, east side is east of Lake Washington. The east side of King County is the hardest hit. And the challenge is much like Italy, the east side is well developed. It's not rural. It hasn't been for years. I haven't been there since probably a bunch of years ago. It's probably all developed now all the way up to Carnation Farms. But it's not a giant city. It doesn't have huge hospitals. It doesn't have a ton. So if they have a huge cluster of cases, they may have support over in Seattle and other areas, but how do you arrange that movement of patients back and forth? And I'm worried that Washington in the Snohomish and King County area is going to have a similar challenge of that curve. We failed to flatten it by preventing infection. Now we have to flatten it by using geography and distributed network resources. The steepness, Christine, the steepness, I looked at the WHO is reporting on some county data, but it's not very accurate. And so I just kept it at the country level. If there's what you need to identify the steepness is a daily amount of new cases and sort of chart that. And I'm not seeing that level of data at the county. Giuliano, pleasure to see you. Do you think this will have an increased strain on supply chains long term? Yes, it will. It already has. I mean, China is the primary producer of, if not the thing you're holding or touching or using, some part in it. The global supply chain is so integrated now that China is a big part of a lot of those components, raw goods, supplies. They're actually getting back to work now. So the good news is China is reemerging from its shutdown, and they're getting back on production. They're getting back on it, but there's a lag. You know, everyone says that it's the fault of just in time. I'm a little biased on that. In times of non-crisis, just-in-time is pretty good because it avoids you having lots of inventory around, taking up space, causing climate change problems, costing a bunch. But when you have a supply shock, you don't have the buffer hanging around. So that lack of buffer, it's going to take a while to work through. The problem now is, Giuliani, is that supply chains are not just in China anymore. I think an iPhone goes through like 24 countries. One of those countries is Germany. Germany has a huge role in a lot of manufacturing and tech goods that are reliant upon China. So you're going to see this effect. Same with Vietnam, same with Taiwan. I mean, and some of these places have contained their virus. Vietnam and Taiwan did their things. And in fact, if you want a little bit of hope, while I'm thinking about it, I have it here. This is actually a wonderful propaganda video. I call it propaganda, but it's a wonderful video from Taiwan that they turned the coronavirus response in the country into a rap song. So it's a little fun to watch, but it's also an interesting policy response about how to get everyone on board. So yes, I think supply chains will remain hit. Robin, another Merson alumni, go Slugs. The numbers you use to confront the infection take into account differential testing procedures. No, they do not. As an analyst, I am using one source of data that I can have. So the question Robin's asking is, when we talked earlier in the Ask Me Anything about the importance of testing, that the testing volume was the spotlight, the strength of the light you have shining down. And if you have unavailable tests, if you have inconsistent testing guidelines, you can't see where all the cases are. So a really important question is not just how many confirmed cases are, but how good the testing was. If you assume South Korea is one, right? South Korea is an example where, let's say everyone who needed a test got a test. That's one. At one, they had so many thousands of cases, but they identified them all. If you're at 20% of South Korea and you have 600 cases confirmed, you might have 3,000 cases in total, but you've only identified 20% of them. So this testing differential is important. But as an analyst, I can only go off the data that I trust as confirmed and credible, and I'm really reluctant to begin stitching together different pieces of data, especially since I'm tracking day by day. So I haven't seen the WHO yet, the World Health Organization, release a day-by-day testing amount, and most of the reports I see are sort of, here's a spot that it's doing 10,000 a day, but we don't know when that started, or they've done 70,000 tests or 1.5 million. So if someone can get me a good, reliable source of testing by day, I might be able to look at it. But right now, I just put a caveat that these are only confirmed cases, which is okay in a way because it's a proxy. And I'd unfortunately argue most countries are worse on testing than better. So you might assume a factor of 3 to 5 going underreported. That's what the University of Washington said in China. So assume that what we're seeing is underreported. That still gives us a proxy to know relatively where the countries are at. South America, Sabrina, good to see you, senior Mulleteer there, Sabrina, patreon.com, InfoMullet, check it out. Sabrina brings up a question of South America. Last week at this time, South America wasn't affected. It was a handful of cases here or there. That is now over. Looking this morning, Brazil has over 100 cases. It's going to go through the same cycle as anything else. We were thinking that there may be an environmental effect that in the southern hemisphere, they're going through summer right now. So it's hotter, it's dry, it's drier, and these things are not, or wetter. These things are not good for viruses. Generally, there was a thinking that the virus would spread in the northern hemisphere and then decline, and it would shift to the southern hemisphere. But we're in this transition point where it's spring here in the north, it's fall, I guess, in the south, and it doesn't look like the southern hemisphere has been. There's cases now breaking out in Africa. I don't know if Brazil has community contagion yet, or this is all travelers coming in, but like anything else, Brazil has got to get ahead of reporting and information to get the social distancing. And the challenge there is in the favelas and other areas are going to have, these are heavily populated cities. It's not easy to get everyone to socially distance. They can't all go work from home. Let's see, looking through. Jules says, what's the system model say about shutting down schools? Definitely, yeah. Is it a good idea, but what are the unintended consequences? So we actually released a model. It's not our simulation. It's made by IC Systems. In fact, I think I have it here. Nope. I had it. Apologize. It's on the InfoMullet. If you scroll down, I released a sneak peek at it last night. This is a system dynamics model. So the system science I do is system dynamics. These are system dynamicists that built a simulation to give you a chance at managing a city with COVID. And it's very new. It was just released last night. Some people said it's a little hard to work. These are not easy models to work, but IC Systems were the ones who put it together, are some of the best at making it interactive. And they let you test policy options of shutting down different things or testing it. It's not perfect. No model can cover all the complications of reality. There's always a boundary. But the general consensus is, from a strictly standpoint of spreading the virus, definitely shutting down universities is good because adults are more likely to carry. There's some question of whether children have the same susceptibility rate of infection and pass around. And there may be more data out. There's new data coming out all the time. I'm not as familiar, but because the impact rate is so heavily skewed older, the thought was maybe children aren't carriers. I tell you, I have 2 daughters. Children are monkey vector 0. I would not trust that children are safe from it, but the unintended consequence of shutting down primary and secondary school as opposed to, say, a university is there's services delivered through these schools, meals, therapy services for special needs kids, IEPs, sports programs, all these things. They may shut down some of the non-essential stuff, but it's not just what are they learning. It's we have used schools as a point of service delivery in local environments. So it's now a balancing act of, do I shut it down to reduce the spread of the contagion, and what is the consequence of that versus is that consequence higher? And this is a very tough policy choice that I think schools are going to have to grapple with in the next week or two. Statistics, Molly, Rick, I love seeing all the Mercer Island alumni here. Go Slugs again. Any statistic, by the way, the Slugs is the unofficial mascot of the MIHS. It looks like a slug when you look at our logo. I don't know what it is. Or snail. Maybe snail's right. But any statistics regarding ethnicity, race, asking, as I'm hearing some African-American communities stating that it doesn't seem to be affecting them, and therefore not limiting gatherings as church. I would say that's probably a bad idea, if only because I've seen it break out in China, Iran, Italy. It's starting in Africa, certain countries in Africa, and Brazil. So There you go. Back of the napkin math. Everything I've seen is that ethnicity doesn't have enough of a factor. Like when ethnicity matters in terms of demographics and disease and infections, it's usually in a very rare disease at the margins. When you have something that infects a large amount of people, there has to be a huge variation in DNA make, and there's just not that much variation between, ethnicity is largely a social construct. It's not a genetic construct. It's a social. It's language. It's skin color. It's social prejudices and systemic injustices over time. It's not, the disease won't care. Now, there may be some variation in genetic makeup. We've seen that in other areas that affect that. But I would err on the side of caution and say close down the services now and wait for the research to come out that tells you you were wrong, because once you've made that choice to keep them open, it's too late. Any group, I said this earlier, groups that are holding non-essential services over this last weekend, we were Saturday night, they could be going on right now, groups that hold it on Sunday, they are probably going to regret that decision come Thursday or Friday next week, because they're going to see a very scary headline of the number of people infected in the U.S., and they're going to think, oh, I did something I can't take back now. I cannot undo the church service, the game event, whatever it was that happened in this last week. I can't reverse that decision. And the question isn't just, are their members going to be sick, but who do their members interact with and who do they touch points with? And where does the infection go from there? Beth responded for the schools that they're already distributing meals for the schools at pickup sites. That's great. And working on ways to deliver. And this is great. So Beth is a school teacher, also a senior Mulleteer. Thanks, Beth. By the way, let me put this down. Whoa. Support your InfoMullet by becoming a subscriber in Mulleteer. But Beth brought up that the schools are beginning to, at least her school is beginning to take care. I think Jules asked about the unintended consequences. So the schools are aware of this in some places, it sounds like, and they're making measures. The question is, at scale, how does that work? And I think a big thing here is, how does the community help fill the gaps? We've become kind of used to in the U.S. of not requiring community work to fill the gaps around, unless you're in a systemically underadvantaged area. We sort of are used to being in our own bubbles, right? We don't see our neighbors. We don't talk to them much. We interact online. We have great interactions. That kind of creates gaps in coverage. And it's going to be a challenge for government services, private services, to just fill those gaps without everyone getting involved. And that's what I think you're starting to see over the weekend that's hopeful, is a lot of community-based, how do we get groceries to the people who need them? How do we check in on people who need it? How do we provide better technology to find the testing kits? You are seeing a lot of movement in this way, and one of the things that makes this country very successful when it's kind of challenging right now, probably not a lot of good examples recently, but one of the things it does is its ability to adapt and evolve very quickly. Unfortunately, we tend to do it under panic. That's, but it is what it is. And I hope to see a lot of this community organization activation. I'm seeing a lot of people starting to, this isn't all just about health and economics and essential services. That's important too, but people are going to be isolated, right? How do you keep connections and socials? I see gaming groups doing a lot. And I only talk about gaming because I do gaming. A lot of games are moving to Twitch. They're embracing streaming. We're starting if you want to learn how to play Go, right? The official social isolation game of the InfoMullet is a game of Go. We just hosted a tutorial this morning that Maria and I filmed, and we'll begin streaming games on Twitch and encouraging members to play through video. So there's one of the good things is that we now, as opposed to 1918, right, we have this social media connection, the ability to recreate social relationships online. Of course, it's not available for everyone. It's not equally accessed. But for those who can access it, it can be a buffer against this sort of isolation, depression, and anxiety. It's really important in times like this. Keep laughing, keep smiling. There's a lot of people. I spent 2 years in Afghanistan, and let me tell you, it wasn't, I was inside a FOB. I was a FOBIT. I was an analyst inside a base, so I wasn't in much physical danger. But it's a 96-hour-a-week schedule. The temperatures are 120 to 140 degrees. It's grossly uncomfortable in every way you can imagine. Being humorous in that situation doesn't mean you're not taking your job seriously. It's a way of sustaining yourself to persevere, to get through day after day after day. So I see a lot of people out there on social media starting to throw punches and get tense, like they're starting to get in more fights as if we had no reason already. Be kind to one another and practice that kind of humor, because we're all going to need to get through this. Yeah, so Beth, Jules, and Josh are all discussing daycare centers and the question Jules brought up, how do you handle childcare for health workers? valid question. I think these are things that state, local, and even federal to some extent need to start talking about. But I think we can't necessarily wait on them. And I think we need to get involved through whatever the organizations are that interface with the schools to do that, to get those questions out there. And I think the communication that I'm seeing here is the kind of stuff, this school's trying this. A lot of what will make this successful is sharing lessons, not just from South Korea to the US of why aren't we adopting what worked from them. But once this really gets going in the U.S., how are different schools reacting and sharing ideas? That's the power of sharing and organizing, is you can begin sharing good ideas. How much of a negative impact has the administration had on coordinating response? Jerry Spalding. I think, well, first of all, there's confidence, which is an intangible, and then there's material, which is like testing kits. I certainly think it's a valid critique of the administration that they have not made the effort over 3 years to inspire confidence and credibility. And that's a ditch you can't dig yourself out of when there happens to be an outbreak. You need to have a buffer of credibility and competence leading into a contagion to be able to call upon it when you need to and say, trust me. Add to that a few what looked like managing for appearances, sort of press photo ops, a few things from the White House that didn't really, some off the hip. The style of President Trump, unless you're one of his hardcore supporters, does not inspire confidence. And that's consistent. That's not changed. The problem now is that the risk of what that means grows things. So that's confidence. It's intangible. It's perception. You see that in the stock market. The material problems we've had with testing kits, I think that's... when we call it incompetence of the administration, I'm cautious because there were choices made early on by the CDC about what kind of testing kit they were going to make. They could have taken in one from the World Health Organization that already existed. They made a choice instead to make it test all the flu symptoms and COVID. And that choice, that's a policy choice. There's reasons why you might do that. In hindsight, because we have the benefit of looking backwards, that became complicated. The development took a while longer than it should have, and then when it came out, it was wrong, and they had to recall all those tests, and we lost crucial time. So in that case, the CDC response looks like a botched response and then led to further consequences of inconsistent guidance. So you had this confidence gap at the top and choices made that didn't work out at the bottom, and you have a real credibility gap that's going to have to be fixed. Food supplies. Jeffrey is asking about food supplies. I see Jennifer's joined. Shout out to another Mercer Island alumni. And Mercer Island, by the way, is these people don't necessarily live in Mercer Island right now, but it's in the middle of the Seattle area we're talking about, where this large outbreak has happened within the United States that we worry about may become like Italy. Supply chain as it relates to food supply and medications, OTC and prescription. There's a lot of complexity in there. I'm careful riffing on things I don't know. I know most of the food supply comes from north and south and within our borders. So that is going to continue. There is not a lot of overseas transport of foods. That tends to come from Mexico, Canada. But it's an integrated network chain. And anywhere you have an integrated network chain, a node in that network going offline, you work around it with other nodes. The question is how many nodes go offline and how do you work it out? I don't think food supply is at risk. Medications, over-the-counter and prescription, I'm not an expert in this, so if someone like Lucas Hills online or someone like that wants to join and chip in, I've heard a lot of the base components of that come out of China. I don't know for sure. To the extent that was interrupted, that may have a challenge for supply, but I've seen a lot of discussion about it. And this is the thing with a virus like this. There's discussions of lots of hypotheticals that could go wrong. One of the reasons I stay grounded on the data is I try and avoid those hypotheticals of what could go wrong and focus on what is going wrong. So it may be not medications are affected. Maybe, I don't know. But it may be some other part of the supply chain we haven't even considered that gets, as a consequence, gets impacted. So we just need to be sensing and aware of what's going on. And if someone wants to chip in on the medicine specifically, So I think I'm caught up to the questions so far, and we're getting close to the top of the hour. There is, for Patreon supporters of the InfoMullet, there is a Discord channel after this. If you want to become a supporter, I will put it up again. You can become a Mulleteer, and this is a one-person show right now. With one of our first goals with the support we get from Patreon is to actually bring on freelancers. A lot of them are struggling right now, so bring in folks who can make better infographics than my obviously not very informative Excel charts, editors, freelancer, stuff like that. So if you want to join, we're going to have a Discord chat after this, which will be a little bit more social, still be Ask Me Anything. I'll hang on for another minute or two here to see if there are any further questions, and I'll scroll through to see if I've missed any. Lots of conversation about schools. I like the conversation that goes back and forth here when people are talking about different ideas. Yeah, Tony Perry makes a good comment from expertise that this. So we talked about unintended consequences of supply chain. It may not be in medications, but he's pointing out the ventilator shortage, right? So ventilators are a very specific technical need that is vital for this kind of outbreak, and there's already a shortage in that market. And so anything that impacts that supply is going to be a huge impact because it's needed across the country wherever these outbreaks. Food supply, you can localize and do it, but if all those ventilators and accessories are coming over from China, for example, and we're going to need a lot of them, that could be a critical, and you can't just turn on a manufacturing plant and make ventilator supplies unless it may take a week or two. It may take a couple of weeks to engineer, design it. So that could be an area where I talk about unintended, or, we're talking about food and medication. It may be much more specific, but much more impactful as an unintended consequence. Going through here. I think I've covered most of these. I got some new comments at the bottom. Transportation, truck drivers. Tony made a good comment here. Truck drivers in particular aren't easily replaced. We've got a lot of areas where we're operating at very thin margins. So trucking, for example, is extremely efficient. Under normal times, that's fine. But if you have an extremely thin margin of error or buffer and something takes out an increment, it can have a cascade effect. This is why you don't need to take out 80% of the trucks to have a cascade effect. You need to have 5% of the drivers not show up, and you will have a ripple effect, which is much more outsized because each of those trucks carries an outsized proportion of the total load. How does Connor, good to see you. Struggling freelancer here. We'll stay in contact as we hit. How does the end game play out? I feel like it will be a hard political choice. Life travel. Okay, so I think I mentioned before the life cycle from outbreak to stability appears to be in China 20 to 30 days. Call that the early game, right? Or mid game. Probably early game. Probably game's the wrong word, but that's the first battle, right? Getting through that sharp curve with the outbreak where you're having the additional surge on the hospital, and that's going to be all hands on deck, and that's going to take the majority of focus. Following that, once it stabilizes, there's going to be a 3 to 4 week period, call this the mid game, where people don't want to move or travel because we just saw what happened with the surge. And even though it's stabilized, none of us believe it yet. None of us want to get on planes for it. There's a lot of risk. The end game here happens probably 3 months out to 9 months, where we begin looking at, is there cyclical waves of this infection that go through? I haven't seen it in China yet or Japan, which means that a place that has contained it, a new breakout happens, and all of a sudden you're dealing with this whole dynamic once again in a new area. So in China, a lot of the cases were in Hubei. There's a big part of China that's not in Hubei. So the question is there going to be another outbreak 2 months from now in another province, a different province? And what does that mean for China's reactions then? Are we going to go through this again? Same thing in the U.S. We have a couple areas, New York City, San Francisco, Seattle, that are having much stronger cases. What happens 3 months from now if it's in, just picking something off the top of my head, and Kenny, Iowa, wherever Tyson lives. I like picking on Tyson's hometown, right? So what happens if these outbreaks happen again? Then it becomes a cyclical thing. We do see evidence in the past in the 1918 Spanish flu, and I want to be careful invoking that because that's such a emotive, powerful memory. People get scared by it. But in the Spanish flu, there were 2 waves. The first wave actually came through and passed. It was the second wave that caused the most damage. There's a third factor here is this may just become a seasonal thing. It's just a new form of flu that has certain characteristics, or a new form of coronavirus that adds to the normal challenge of flus. In about 18 months, they suspect they will have a vaccine for this. They have typed it out genetically. They know it is evolving and it's kind of mutate a lot. So that's going to be a challenge, but I'm pretty confident we'll come up with a vaccine for it. But that vaccine won't be really available for 18 months, maybe a little earlier if they rush things and pass some waivers, but it's not going to be available in 2 weeks. They're just starting the safety test for that now in Seattle. And that test is not safety as stops the vaccine. That test is safety as does a healthy person get sick just by taking the vaccine? And that's part of the testing process. And so we've got to roll that all through. My hope here is that countries start sharing information and we don't all try and solve the same widget in different ways. We begin coordinating aspects of these types of responses internationally. The problem is the international bodies that would normally help coordinate this have really suffered in the last 4 to 6 years, and we're going to see a consequence is that each country is going to try and handle it on its own, and that's not the right way to do this. Lee Hammock, good to see you. Thanks for joining. 3D printing groups. contacted by Italian doctors to print out valves. Yeah. So here's a good example. Jerry mentions that the 3D printing groups have been contacted by Italian doctors to print out valves. This is the kind of interchange. In this week alone, I've talked to activists and advocates from all different countries around the world that happened to find the article when it went viral, no pun intended, or other things. Building connections and sharing information. There's a lot of capacity to solve elements of this lingering all over the place. The key is connecting them to the people who need them, who the people who need to find them, which is why social media is going to probably be important. Share connections, share networking, share ideas, and then advocate for your governments. I see Sabina's on, and I'm wondering how she's been working with the Bangladesh issue. You know, you got to advocate with your governments for solutions, but the government is primarily going to be focused on containing the spread, providing healthcare for those most critically and life-threatening impacted, and that's about all they're going to have the wherewithal through. Maybe the schools will probably be able to do some school-related things. There's going to be a lot of gaps that the government isn't able to fill that other folks can jump in and fill to sort of fill it, or in areas like, I don't know any government that's 3D printing ventilators. So Jerry, if your group's able to print medical quality 3D ventilators, you know, hot damn, that's a good thing to tap into, because that leverages the power of a group to provide supports. Again, we're not going to flatten the curve on this by time. In Europe, probably not in the US. We're probably already in an outbreak scenario. We just don't know it because we don't have testing. We're going to need to flatten the curve by distributing the bulge of cases in certain geographic areas. Either bring resources in, even to sending ventilators to Italy that are 3D printed. Got it. Good job. Or dispersing the load of a local area out to areas that are less affected, and that way flatten the curve by a geographic dimension as opposed to a time dimension. Oh, and Beth mentioned Folding at Home is doing COVID-19 modeling, which is good to hear. So we're at an hour. I'm going to close it now because I think we've gotten most of the questions exhausted. I appreciate everyone's time. For those who are Mulleteers, join us on the Discord server. I'm going to close down and get a few things done, and then I'll pop over there probably for an hour or so. We're doing it a test to see how it works. Be kind of social, more interaction. You can actually talk. I think there's voice on there. So thanks, everyone. Be well. If there's interest in this, I may do another Ask Me Anything on Wednesday. These are kind of tiring, but I feel like these regular updates are useful. So let me know if this is useful or helpful, and I'll get this uploaded to YouTube later tonight or tomorrow morning. Oh, last thing, we've had some great support from Ree and Bill in getting transcripts. So these will have transcripts that I'll make available on Google. So if the video is hard, we'll have a written transcript of the whole thing. Thanks, everyone, and have a good evening. Bye-bye. Thanks for watching the video. Hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to follow the InfoMullet, visit us on Facebook or Twitter. And if you'd like notifications when we post new video content, click on the red subscribe button below the video. If you've ever wanted to become a Mulleteer and support the InfoMullet, visit us on Patreon. We appreciate the support.